Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta, at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Steve Winters, a phonetics professor here at the University of Calgary. Phonetics is typically described as the study of speech sounds, but in this interview, Steve walks us through exactly what that means, from the way we make the sounds of the languages we speak to the way we understand those of others. We also chat a bit about the variety of speech sounds, not only across different languages, but even just across the varieties of English in the United States alone. All right, so thank you, Steve, so much for being here with me today.
No problem.
So I was wondering if you could just start out by introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about your background in linguistics and what you do here at the University of Calgary.
Yeah, so my name is Steve Winters. I am a phonetician in the linguistics program at the University of Calgary. As you know, I've been here for 18 years now, just past like the 18th anniversary of my arrival in Canada, because I started out in the U.S. So linguistically, I got my PhD from Ohio State, as I mentioned, in 2003, and then kind of bounced around for a few years until I found a permanent position here at the University of Calgary. But I've been doing linguistics for a long time. I kind of discovered it in the library when I was a 14-year-old high school student. So, yeah, the way it started out, everybody's got a different origin story, but the way it started out for me is that my first year of high school, I started taking languages. So I wanted to do German because my family has a German background. I was like, oh, that's cool. And like everybody else takes Spanish because I don't want to do that. So, and I was like, I got really into it, like conjugations and declensions and all this stuff. And like I got so into it that like within a month or two, I was going to the library and looking up like other language textbooks so I could learn other languages. And then like as part of that process, I spent a lot of time in the library and then discovered linguistics textbooks there too, and was like reconstructing into European roots and stuff and learning the IPA. And then it just went from there. So I studied linguistics as that's my major in college. I went to a small undergraduate college in Southern California. And that was fun. And at the end of that, I was like, well, I don't really know where to go next. Might as well go to grad school because what else is there to do?
Yeah, same.
But I remember my advisor at the time was like, well, you got to choose like what to specialize in. And like, so I don't know if your listeners know, but like there's kind of like a top to bottom like hierarchy of things to study in linguistics, from semantics and meaning at the top, syntax, morphology, phonology, phonetics. And I was like, oh, I'll do phonetics. That's fun. And it has wound up being like, I think, the best choice I could have made academically because it is a place where language intersects with harder sciences like math and physics and that sort of thing, which I've always loved anyways as well. So I can bring a lot of that knowledge to bear. And like, honestly, a lot of things come to bear with like phonetics because I teach about how to digitize like sound in 441. You might remember that lecture, right? How to go from like analog sound to like just numbers like ones and zeros.
Yeah.
And well, one of my colleagues, Darren Flynn, says that's his favorite of my lectures. Is he goes back to YouTube and watches that one every once in a while. But I've gotten like calls from like people in the media actually about how that actually works because I put it out there, and they seem to think I'm some sort of expert on it, even though I don't know exactly how to do it at an engineering level, but it's something you need to know just conceptually to understand how sound gets into a computer, because it is relevant to how we analyze sound in phonetics. But yeah, going a little too far afield with phonetics, it's the sounds of language, basically. How do they get out of your mouth, and how do they go into your ear, and how do you understand them in your brain? And most of my research is on the what's going on in your brain side of things. When you hear somebody speak, how do you interpret what it means?
Yeah. Cool. That's so interesting that you started out your linguistics passion so early. That's not something I hear very often. Like, most people are like, I had never heard of it until usually they just stumble upon it in university or something.
Right.
But yeah, that's really cool. So you kind of already touched on this, like how, like I was going to ask you how you would describe phonetics to somebody who's never heard of it. And you kind of gave that sort of breakdown of like what comes out of your mouth and how you perceive it, or how the listener perceives it. Is there any, like, would you say that's like the core sort of ideas behind phonetics, or is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of short-shrifted the articulatory side a little bit, I guess I would say. So, like, traditionally, phonetics has been about, like, describing how you move your articulators, like your tongue and your lips and your vocal folds, so on and so forth, when you actually speak. And people have known about that since antiquity, basically. So, like, the grammarian Panini, like, wrote about that in his grammar. The Indian grammarian, like, I can't remember what era that was, but like 1,000 years BC, whatever. So that, because you can feel it going on, people know about that, and the facts are basically there, but describing that is a huge part of phonetics as well. And with modern technology and the ability to make recordings really easily, which we were just chatting about before this interview, it's easy to analyze the acoustic side of sound and get a better sense of how that works and how it relates to what people hear when they actually listen to speech.
Yeah, so you mentioned like this thing about articulatory phonetics, so what's actually happening in our mouths as we speak. Do you mind walking us through like a little bit about what you know? Like,
sure.
What kinds of things, like, okay, yeah, lips and tongue move, but like what is the significance? Why do people care?
Yeah, well...
or what's going on?
Why do people care is like a separate question. So what's going on is, and you can feel this when you speak yourself, like air comes primarily through your lungs, up through your trachea, and then in the middle of your throat. If you feel it, there's a little bump there, which is the thyroid cartilage, which is right in front of the structure called your larynx. And behind that is a pair of ligaments called the vocal folds. Some people call that your voice box or the vocal cords or whatever. Vocal folds is usually the term that phoneticians will use, but those can come together, and if air gets pushed through them from your lungs, then they will vibrate. They'll open and close really quickly and give you what's called a voicing sound. So the demo I use in class for this is if you go back and forth between like an S and a Z sound or a Z sound, and hold your fingers around that pointy spot in the middle of your throat, you can feel the buzz for the Z.
Yeah.
And that's voicing. So that's like a parameter. You can turn that on and off when you're speaking. It'll be off for sounds like S. It'll be on for sounds like Z. And then above that, you can do a variety of different things, primarily with your tongue. So your tongue gets involved. I'll say something about that in a second. But also the back of your palate or your velum gets involved too. So you can lower that and have air go through your nose for sounds like M and N, nasal sounds. Or you can raise that structure so that air only flows through your mouth. So just focusing on air that only flows through your mouth, we get sounds like D or B or a G or a K or something like that. Lots of consonant sounds, which are primarily created by bringing your tongue in close proximity to another articulator or possibly your lips or your teeth. There's also vowel sounds, which do not have articulators in close proximity to each other, but they allow the voicing at your vocal folds to resonate at particular frequencies. So E versus U versus Ah are vowel sounds. So we know quite a bit about how these sounds are produced. You can feel where the consonant sounds are produced usually, like a B is made by closing your two lips. A K is you raise the back of your tongue to the palate and make contact there. And usually when people first start studying phonetics, they have their mind blown a little bit because they've been doing speech their whole lives, but never really thought about what's going on inside their mouth. But when they do it, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually what's happening. It's a little bit harder with the vowels. You tend to move your tongue because the tongue doesn't touch anything really when you produce a vowel, but you can feel your tongue moving forward for like a vowel like E, maybe backward and lower for a vowel like ah. Like your doctor asks you to like say ah because that lowers your tongue out of the way and you can see the back of your throat or whatever. So your tongue has to be in particular positions for these sounds to sound like they ought to. And that's articulatory phonetics in a nutshell, but then it produces specific kinds of sounds with specific kind of resonant frequencies, which we can see when we record and look at them in a computer and try to figure out how do we make that transfer from like those specific acoustic characteristics to what we perceive. As you know, there's different theories of speech perception, some which say we don't really perceive sounds, some actually say we actually perceive the gestures. What people are doing articulatorily through like a special mechanism in our minds. And there's some controversy there about which one is true or not. But it leads to good research and good questions, basically. We can go into that a bit further if you want. But to address that other question you answered, why do people care? People like me, I just think it's cool and interesting. And I guess at a more sort of like broader appeal level, one thing it can kind of lead to is it can often tell me a lot about where a person is from. So like I think we tend to think of like, say, England as a place where there's lots of different like regional accents or varieties. There's a lot of regional accents and varieties in the U.S. as well, but they're not as focused on. I think people, as an American myself, like I grew up thinking, well, there's like general American, there's like people from the South and like people from New York or whatever, right? There's finer grained distinctions as well. Like I can tell if somebody's from Pittsburgh. I can tell if somebody's from California. I can, often tell if somebody's from like the Great Lakes region or Minnesota or whatever. And like the more you learn about how people speak in these areas, the more you can pick up on it yourself and actually reproduce it yourself. I don't necessarily want to sound like I'm from Pittsburgh, but I could if I tried, right? So fun stuff like that. And a lot of my students get into it for more practical reasons. For instance, a lot of my students want to go on and do speech-language pathology. And so my part of that is I teach them like what is going on just, articulatorily. What are you moving around to get these sounds out of your mouth? And I know, like on the more applied side, those people tend to operate at a higher level in terms of like speech-language communication, sort of more about the back and forth of talking. But it can also apply to like specific physical problems that a person might have in speaking as well. Mm-hmm. And knowing kind of the baseline of like what most people who don't have a disorder do kind of helps set the groundwork for people in that profession.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That's really cool. Well, I mean, yeah, really cool. I'm also a phonetician or aspiring phonetician, I guess I should say. So
yeah.
I'm well versed in some of this stuff, but yeah, no, it's really cool to hear you talk about like how to apply it too, but also like how the articulatory part kind of plays into different theories of how we perceive speech. Like that's also sort of part of why we might care about articulatory phonetics as well. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, I have a question because you said you can tell when someone is from Pittsburgh. I know like California I get because they, like I feel like I can perceive a California accent or, there's lots of different, like a very ooh, like a fronted ooh kind of,
mm-hmm.
Like dude.
Yeah, fronted O's too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I'm wondering, what is it about Pittsburgh?
Well, guess what? Pittsburgh has fronted O's as well. It's kind of a funny spot because part of it sounds, in some ways, is a little bit like Philadelphia, and there's a rivalry there and they don't really want to have anything to do with each other. But there's a bit carryover. But kind of really distinctive thing with Pittsburgh is what we call monophthongization, which is a big word, of the ow vowel, or ow diphthong. So they won't say towel, they'll say tall. for like something you use to draw yourself off. So when that ow goes to ah straight through, like, oh, now I know you must be from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
As long as these other things factor into it as well. Like if you hear these like Cokes or whatever, fronted O's. So like it's usually a combination of things, and people have to give themselves away. Like I can't just listen to you and know where you're from unless you do something distinctive.
Yeah.
But that it's there if you're listening. And so that we've talked about this, but when you become a phonetician, you wind up listening a lot to how people are saying the things that they're saying and often don't pay attention to what the meaning is of what they're saying, which can lead to problems because normally people don't process things at that level and they get annoyed if you're not listening. But it's fun because there's a lot of information in the speech signal that's coming out of someone's mouth.
Yeah, I get that. I do that with my partner all the time when they say something. I'm like, wait, can you say that again? And then they're always like, wait, did I say it wrong? And I'm like, no. I just want to, like you said it perfectly. I just want to hear how you said it because it was said interestingly and I want to write it down.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's part of the mission message as a linguist is to get out there. I don't know if you've covered this in other podcasts you've done, but we just care what you're doing. We're not making judgments.
Yeah.
We just want to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 Line. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. So you've talked a lot about like these different variations and different accents and stuff throughout like the U.S. or in varieties of English, and so there's all these different sounds, and I'm wondering like there's a lot of different sounds in the world's languages like generally, and some like depending on what your native language or native languages are, some of those sounds are harder to produce or easier to produce. Like I know like I grew up doing French immersion. And so when I speak to people that don't know French, they have a hard time with the r, the like French R. It's like very r, and they have a hard time with it if they've only learned English. So I'm wondering, like, if you know a little bit about like why are languages different in the sounds that they use? Are there sounds that languages have in common? And I'm wondering if you could say a few words about just the variation we see across languages and maybe that plays back into articulatory stuff, or I don't know if it's about how it sounds to the person. Like maybe some sounds are just easier to perceive, which, you kind of went through that whole sort of line of phonetics from mouth to ears. Yeah,
that's an interesting question, and it kind of ties into the variation I was talking about at like the dialectal or accent level.
Yeah.
But it's more significant when you're talking about different languages, because often what will happen, or we presume happened historically, is that languages emerged in cases where like there were communities that weren't necessarily in contact with each other, and so there's like one community speaks language A, and then another community like on a different island or something speaks language B, and what sounds they use are kind of up to them. And I'll say, I guess, a couple things on this in this respect. There are some sounds that are more common in the world's languages. So I talked about the vowels E, U, and Ah a minute ago. Like almost every language has those three vowels with some exceptions. Mm-hmm. A vowel that's not as common is A, and like in cat. And that's not even in every single variety of English. And then there's some other vowels, like say going to French, like U, that high front rounded vowel, is not that common in the world's languages. And there's questions about why is this? This is kind of part of one of the questions that phonetics is there to try to answer. Yeah. Why are some vowels or some sounds more common than others? And two typical answers that people give are like, on the one side, maybe it's easier to say E than U, because for E, you don't have to round your lips, and for U, you do. And then the other part of that is maybe some vowels just are easier. They're more distinct. They're easier for a listener to hear or understand. And this applies to the consonant side too. So a typical, like very common consonants are what we call the coronals or alveolars. So like T, D, S, or Z, those sorts of things. Those people, you can hypothesize pretty easily. Well, you make those with the tip of your tongue, like ta, 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 da, da. You can feel that. And it's pretty easy to move the tip of your tongue up and down to meet the palate or meet the front of your palate. But then like T is more common than D, or S is more common than Z in the world's languages. And part of that is that if you make a Z, you have to coordinate that vocal fold vibration with it. So all of a sudden you're doing two things for Z, when for S you're doing one. So maybe that's a little bit more articulatorily complex. So maybe that's an articulatory reason why that doesn't exist. But then there's also like, can you actually understand like the difference between this sound and another sound? And I'm trying to think of a good like, so here's a good example in English. F, this might not even come through, but F and Eth or theta are two highly confusable sounds. So like the F at the beginning of a word like foot and the theta at the beginning of a word like thing, they sound very similar. For F, you're curling your lower lip back underneath your upper row of teeth, and you blow through that little constriction. For theta, you put the tip of your tongue between your teeth and blow through that. So they're close, but they're totally different articulatorily, the way you actually produce them. They sound almost identical acoustically. And that contrast is very rare in the world's language. It's not non-existent. You'll see it in other languages like Arabic. It's in English. It's not in French. So like a French speaker is going to have trouble like with theta. They might replace it with something else, like maybe a S or something, or a T, just because it's easier for them to say that, having learned that French growing up. But that's one case where just because of perceptual difficulties, those sounds are not super common. So I could go on, but I don't know if you want to talk about that further.
No, that's really cool. That was a really good breakdown of both the articulatory side of things, but also the acoustic and like how people are hearing these things and why some of these sounds might be a little bit more or less common across the world's languages. Yeah. And I think I think this is really interesting, obviously, because this is what I also study. I feel like this is like some of these things are some of the things that really got me interested in phonetics, like originally, of like, oh, I never even thought of that. And I never even thought of like how, and like you said, like all these things that we're doing in our mouths that like we just do without even thinking. And then somebody points out to me, oh, when you make that sound, it's this specific, your tongue is in this position. And I'm like, oh, it is. How did you know that? Like what? Yeah. It's really cool. It's just something that I think linguistics in general too. It's like language is something that a lot, like we all take for granted because we use it all the time. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me to linguistics was like, whoa, it's this thing that I've been using that I apparently have all this implicit knowledge of that I just had no idea. And then making that sort of explicit knowledge, I was like, this is so cool. So I was wondering, like, you've given a really good breakdown of like a variety of different areas of interest in like phonetics, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about some of your research specifically, or some of the research in your lab. What kinds of questions do you ask as a phonetician, like for research, and what do what do you hope that tells us about the way people speak or the way people understand language? That's a good question. I think my research is not like some coherent grand plan, it turns out. If I get interested in something, I'm like, okay, let's look at that and see how it works, which is, there's good and bad to that. I get more variety, but I tend to, wind up doing things that novice researchers would do a lot over and over again. But it's fun, and it enables me to work with a lot of, talented students like yourself in a variety of different ways. But I'll say one sort of line of research has been about like, what can you tell
about a person from their speech that is sort of maybe independent of the language that they're speaking. So these are some studies I did a while back, but I looked at whether or not you can identify a person by their voice across languages. So like the particular languages we looked at the time were English and German. So like get English and German bilinguals. And if you like train somebody to learn how to identify this person in English, can you identify them when they're speaking German? Or is there something they do to their voice to make that change? It was interesting because I was kind of thinking about that in terms of like what objective properties are there in a person's voice that you might be able to latch onto. And it turns out there's more subjectivity to that, I guess you could say, because like if you're an English listener, it winds up being easier to make the German to English transition to like than the English to German transition. But that has kind of one way that kind of evolved over time is to think about the specifics of intonation. So like what you're doing in terms of the pitch of your voice when you speak, and also what kind of voice quality are you using. So you know this because I talk about it in my phonetics classes, but there are different voice qualities. Like this is a modal voice, and this is a breathy voice, and like this is a creaky voice. So I've also looked at like, so a lot of people, especially younger people these days, speak in creaky voice quite a bit like this for whatever reason. And I've kind of looked into like why, how often that happens, try to get a sense of why that happens. And then also whether or not you kind of lose a sense of the person having the same voice. So like not just translation between like different languages, but like if somebody is speaking in creaky voice, do you understand that it's the same person in modal voice and so on and so forth? And that transition is actually harder to make than like an English to German transition. So voice quality kind of has more of a definitive property of what your voice sounds like to people than what language you're speaking, I guess is the easiest way to put it.
That's really cool. That kind of reminds me. I can't remember what it was. A paper I read about these different cues to like gender perception as well in someone's voice, and like that it's not just pitch. It's like pitch and resonance, and I think weight is what they use to describe it. I don't remember the exact things, but it was like very. It was very much like this paper anyways had like a demo page where you could listen to voice teachers change their voice along these specific dimensions to like illustrate this, and going from one dimension to the other, I could barely tell that it was the same person, but it was. But like they were, and these were voice teachers, so like voice coaches, I believe for like trans individuals who were going through like voice training. But so they're like voice teachers, so they know how to, change their voice in the way that they want. But it was shocking to me how quickly just like even just one step change in these different dimensions made it sound like a whole other person. Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
Yeah, I guess I'd say with that, the gender angle is interesting because you have to talk about that in phonetics because like it does play a role, and like there's a general pattern that like. Vocal fold vibration is going to be at a lower frequency for males than it is for females, or especially for kids, which has they have a very high vocal fold vibration frequency. Is I guess the easiest way to put it. It's the pitch of their voice, but there's sort of like default arrangements for that for any given person. But there's gray area between the genders, and there's like a lot of range that you can use as an individual speaker too. So going back to voice quality, you can decide whether you want to speak more breathily if you want, consciously or not. And like maybe it has relevance in some circumstances that it doesn't in others. But that in the past, people thought women speak with breathy voice. And actually, I think about this a lot because I tend to watch old movies. Mm-hmm. I've spent a fair amount of time being a caregiver for my mom the past couple of years, and she only wants to watch movies in the 40s. So I'm always watching these movies, and I'm like, how much breathy voice is there here? And there's a lot, but it's not exclusive. So like women were speaking in creaky voice back then too. But those, I guess, voice quality settings or standards have shifted over time. And so women use more creaky voice now, which was traditionally like a male voice quality. But even as an individual speaker, and especially if you know linguistics and phonetics, you can shift it as much as you want to get whatever sort of, social meaning across that you want to get to other people. And I guess I'll also add that what we found, I did this work with a former grad student of mine, Sarah Greer, is that the creaky voice is often interpreted as being kind of a cool voice. And so like if you want to sound more cool, that's one way to give that a shot, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, good. That's good advice for people out there that want to sound cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was gonna ask when you mentioned that like all these different social, like the way that you're perceived along these different social dimensions, like coolness or something. Yeah, I was gonna ask about. So I'm glad you shared that creaky voice tends to sound more cool to people.
Yeah, but like that also is a bit culturally dependent. Like in Japan, apparently it's interpreted as like authoritative, and like old men will use creaky voice or something to be like, this is the way it has to be or something. Yeah. So that's dependent too. But like if that's why as phoneticians we're listening to like what's on the surface, because like, oh, now we know what's actually you're saying, like, and from that we can kind of get a sense of how you're getting this like bigger meaning across that's not explicitly stated in the words, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Wicked. Cool. Yeah, so we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So I was just going to ask you, like, you mentioned that a lot of your students go on to do something like speech language therapy. I'm wondering if there's any other applications of phonetics that you've found that you either yourself or your students get into. Like some things I'm thinking of are like learning a new language or teaching a new language, I guess, as well, or like speech recognition or things like that. Like especially given the overlap in like analyzing speech with computers. If you see any sort of overlaps there.
Yeah. It's interesting because like I said at the start of this, is that I got into linguistics because I was interested in learning languages, and I still am. I just don't have time for it really anymore. But I remember I studied abroad in Germany when I was in undergraduate and college, and at that time I was really focused on like I have the tools. I should be able to sound like a German speaker, and I was kind of really proud of myself if like I could fool people into thinking that I was. I don't think I ever really succeeded. I think at best I fooled some people into thinking I was from England rather than the U.S. But there's limitations on that because of your settings kind of get stuck based on your native language. So generally speaking, the later you learn a language, the harder it is to like undo that and to sound like a native speaker of some other language. So normally people, when they're talking about language learning, they focus more on like comprehensibility in the modern day and age rather than like kind of like losing your accent completely. It's always going to be part of who you are, just that. So it helps, I think, to know this stuff, to learn another language, but there are limits on it. The other aspect you mentioned is cool part of it, and I don't know if I have had a couple of students work in the tech industry with like looking at generating speech recognition modules that will be able to like interpret what somebody is saying and like go from speech to text, that sort of thing. So that's one application for sure, and we see that a lot nowadays. Yeah, and it's a lot better than it used to be, but it's still not perfect. So there's always room for improvement. And actually, in the older days, some of my grad student cohorts went to work in like just telecommunications in general, like working in the phone industry or what have you. But yeah, there's a lot there. And as you know, the tech industry is always growing. So that's another avenue to go. It's, if you'd rather work with machines than people, that's one possible career path, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, some people don't like people, so I get that. No, yeah, awesome, cool. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have, so I just want to say thank you again for coming in and describing the really cool research that you do. Like, phonetics is awesome, but also the research that you do in like yourself and in your lab and stuff. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks. It was my pleasure to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.